Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take complex topics, dig through the sources, and pull out the key insights for you. Today we're tackling something that honestly might change how you look at a really familiar subject. Try to picture this. For years, decades even, the image of drug trafficking was, gritty, dangerous, very hidden, things shadowy figures, stacks of cash, crime drama stuff. Now, fast forward. That image is maybe less cartel kingpin and more, well, maybe a college kid with a smartphone. A QR code for payments. It's quite a shift, isn't it? Today, we're diving deep into what we're calling the gentrification of weed. Sounds maybe a bit provocative.
A little.
Yeah, but it really gets at this huge transformation in the cannabis black market. We're going to trace how it went from being dominated by, say, Mexican cartels to a situation now where, believe it or not, suburban basements and college dorms are key hubs. Our main source for this is a really compelling piece called The Gentrification of Weed, From Cartels to College Kids, from Nug Notes. So our mission today, to unpack how this whole illicit market changed so much, what drove those shifts, and what the surprising and maybe sometimes troubling implications are. Get ready for some moments, I think, about how fast markets can flip and, well, who wins in the end. You might think you know this topic, but we're aiming to show you some unseen forces at play, give you a fresh perspective. Okay, let's start by setting the scene. Early 2000s. Expert, what did the weed supply chain look like back then?
Well, it's fascinating, really, just how centralized and, frankly, dangerous the whole thing was. 20 years ago, if you were getting cannabis in the U.S., the odds were very high. It came via Mexican cartels. And this wasn't the fancy stuff you see today.
Yeah.
This was typically cheap, bulk, pressed cannabis. Bricks, basically. Quantity over quality was the name of the game.
Bricks. Yeah, that sounds familiar for that time. And what kind of price are we talking? How did that stuff actually get distributed once it was in the U.S.?
The source mentions about $400 a pound right at the border. Pretty cheap, relatively speaking.
Okay.
And once inside the U.S., distribution was mainly through urban gangs. They operated out of what people called trap houses in cities. So you see, it wasn't just selling a product. It was about controlling territory. It was a violent supply chain stretching all the way from Mexico to a city street corner. Very high risk, every step of the way.
Right. So a grim picture. Centralized, violent, high risk, dealing in low-quality bulk weed. But then, maybe around a decade ago, things really started to change, didn't they? What were the first signs of that cartel system cracking?
Exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting. The ground definitely started shifting around 2012. That's when you saw these big legislative changes. I mean, legalization in Colorado in 2012, then California in 2016. These weren't small tweaks. They were a total game changer.
I bet. So with states like Colorado and California going legal, did people just stop wanting the old stuff? Did that cartel mids brick weed just vanish overnight?
Vanish is maybe a strong word, but obsolete is pretty accurate. The shift was dramatic. Once legal markets started offering high-quality indoor-grown cannabis, what people quickly started calling exotics consumers didn't just prefer it. They pretty much abandoned the old brick weed, the cartel mids, as the source calls them. The impact was fast and really stark.
How stark? Like, what are we talking numbers-wise?
Well, get this. By 2022, U.S. border seizures of cannabis, they dropped by 95%. 95%.
Wow. That's not a dip. That's a collapse.
Exactly. It's a total collapse of that specific supply route. And if you connect that to the bigger picture, it just shows the incredible power of consumer choice, right? And a legal market, even one that seemed totally entrenched, can be undermined really fast when there's a legal, regulated alternative offering something better. The cartels, their whole model was built on bulk, low-cost smuggling. They were just not set up for a market that suddenly wanted quality, variety, safer ways to buy. Their business model basically imploded overnight.
95%.
Yeah.
That's their cannabis business gone, essentially.
Yeah.
Consumer choice just wiped it out. But okay, the demand didn't disappear. Something had to fill that void, right?
Yeah.
What happened next?
Right. Demand was still there, maybe even growing, but for a different product. So the trap didn't vanish, like you said. It just moved. It shifted.
Yeah.
From bricks and those urban trap houses to, well, bedrooms and basements. As demand for these exotics took off, a whole new infrastructure popped up, much more localized, decentralized, and often completely invisible to traditional law enforcement.
So instead of cartel fields, we're talking grow lights in someone's garage. Is that the idea?
Pretty much, yeah. Indoor grow started appearing everywhere, not just remote fields, but, like the source mentions, basements and garages in the Bay Area, suburbs all over the country. And this led to a whole new thing, plug culture. It became super local. You didn't need this massive cartel network anymore. Your plug, your supplier, was suddenly someone, maybe in your town, down the street even.
And it wasn't just the growing, right? The way it was sold and moved changed, too. It's not just where it's grown, but how it gets to people.
Absolutely. Communication and distribution shifted online in a big way, changed the whole footprint of the black market. Like the source highlights, you had Gen Z dealers just posting menus on Snapchat, Instagram.
No, really? Just openly?
Yeah, using emojis instead of old slang. DMs replaced risky street meets or, pager codes from back in the day. It became incredibly efficient.
Yeah.
Discreet.
And then there's the whole mail thing.
Yeah.
The source says the mail became the new trap house.
Yeah.
That sounds almost organized, like a shadow business.
It's kind of a logistical marvel in a weird way. The source points this out. You had teenagers shipping zips, ounces, across state lines using regular USPS flat rate boxes.
No kidding. Using the postal service.
Yep. Think about the audacity, but also the efficiency. Using a federal service for nationwide illicit distribution, suddenly weed could go anywhere, coast to coast. And the new trap house was a dorm room, not some fortified warehouse. This is really what we mean by gentrified in this context. It's less visible, less overtly violent, more spread out into seemingly normal, everyday places.
That brings up a big question, though. If the whole system becomes so spread out, so digital,
Yeah.
how do authorities even track that? It sounds almost impossible.
It's a massive challenge. The old system, dangerous as it was, had clear points you could target. Border crossings, big stash houses. Now, the network's incredibly fragmented. You're not looking for a huge cartel grow-up anymore. You might be looking for, a kid in a suburb with a few grow lights and a phone. The sheer number of small individual deals makes old-style interception really, really difficult.
Okay, so fast forward again, maybe 2018 to 2023. That picture of the weed guy we started with, completely different. Who is the dealer now in this gentrified market?
Yeah, the source paints a picture kind of like an archetype. A finance major or skater with 10 pounds in the closet and a Cash App QR code.
Right. A long way from the old image.
A very long way. It's a totally different demographic getting involved. People who probably never would have touched the drug trade 20 years ago.
In the actual operations, are they still carrying the same risks? The same violence we saw with the cartels?
Not in the same way, no. It's dramatically different. You don't have the turf wars, the colors, the crews fighting over corners in the same way. The risk profile for these new local dealers seems much lower. The source mentions a high schooler could potentially make, say, $1,000 a week just reselling stuff from a bigger plug. And the phrase used is no gun, no set, no overhead, at least not in that traditional gang-related sense. It's more like a cottage industry or a hyperlocal delivery thing.
It almost sounds, benign is maybe the word. This gentler black market seems to pull in a totally different kind of person.
It's a complete flip of the old drug dealer image, yeah. And that creates this illusion of safety, which is really appealing, especially to younger sellers, maybe. The shift from, violent gangs to seemingly ordinary people selling from home or college, it changes how society sees the black market itself.
Right.
It almost seemed normalized in some groups, entrepreneurial even, less dangerous, certainly.
Okay, so we have this idea of a gentler market.
Yeah.
The numbers tell a slightly different story, especially when you look at who gets arrested, right? It seems like those systemic inequalities are still very much there.
Exactly. That's the really uncomfortable truth here. This gentrification, it hasn't fixed everything, not by a long shot. Despite this huge shift in who's selling and how, the basic inequalities in the system, they haven't gone away. Even while, like you said, you have maybe more white kids running the lower risk delivery side, the Snapchat menus, the dorm room stuff. The data our source cites is stark. Black youth are still arrested for cannabis offenses 3.6 times more often than their white peers.
3.6 times. Wow. That's a huge difference in enforcement. So what does that say about this gentler aspect?
It says that the perception of lower risk, that gentler feel, it's often racially conditional. It's a privilege, essentially, that not everyone experiences equally in this new market. The fact these systemic inequalities persist, even when the market changes so drastically, points to much deeper issues in law enforcement, societal bias, all of that. It shows the cannabis market might have gentrified, but the application of justice certainly hasn't kept pace.
And there's another uncomfortable truth, isn't there? The cartels. When weed stopped being so profitable for them, they didn't just give up, did they? What happened when cannabis got gentrified out of their main business?
No, they didn't give up. Their solution, tragically, was to pivot. They shifted focus to far more dangerous, far more lethal substances. The Nug Notes piece is clear on this. With weed profits down, the major trafficking organizations moved out of cannabis. They focused their efforts, their infrastructure on things like fentanyl and meth. The weed market was basically, yeah, gentrified right out of their portfolio. It wasn't high profit, high stakes enough for them anymore.
It's chilling. Solving one problem, or at least changing it dramatically, potentially created a much worse one. What does that shift tell us about these criminal organizations?
Well, connecting it to the bigger picture again, it's a really grim illustration of how adaptive these organizations are. When one market dries up or gets too competitive, they don't just disappear. They take their networks, their resources, their smuggling routes, and they apply them to something else, usually whatever offers higher profits, higher stakes. And this creates completely new, often much more devastating social problems, like we're seeing with the fentanyl crisis. So the gentrification of weed didn't get rid of the cartels. It just redirected their focus towards substances that pose an even greater public health threat. It's a stark reminder that these market forces, even the illegal ones, are always shifting, and the consequences can be profound and often really unexpected.
What a journey we've covered today, charting this huge transformation of the cannabis black market. We started back in the early 2000s, right? Mexican cartels running the show, moving cheap bricks through urban trap houses, high risk, violent. Then legalization comes along in places like Colorado, California, acts as this massive tipping point. Suddenly nobody wants the old stuff. And that leads to the rise of the new plug. This decentralized digital network, suburban basements become grow ops, social media is the storefront, even the mail gets involved. The whole face of the dealer changes. Less gang member, more. College kid entrepreneur, maybe, creates this perception of a gentler, lower risk black market.
And that's really the core of it, isn't it? This dramatic shift from centralized cartels to a diffuse digital system, driven by legalization, driven by what consumers wanted. But as we've really dug into, this change has two sides. Yes, the retail risk seems lower for some, the market looks gentrified, but you've still got incredibly unequal enforcement hitting communities of color harder. And then the really dark twist. The cartels didn't just fold, they pivoted, moved into much deadlier drugs like fentanyl and meth, leaving us with arguably far worse problems. So here's something for you, the listener, to think about. When an illegal market like cannabis changes, so much becomes less visible, maybe less overtly violent on the surface, gets gentrified. Does that really make the whole landscape safer, or does it just shift the risks, shift the consequences onto different people, and maybe channel the danger into even worse substances? Worth thinking about just how interconnected all these changes really are and who ultimately pays the price.